They're reliable, affordable, and built to last. So why do senior riders keep rejecting Japanese motorcycles? It's not about horsepower or price, it's about identity, legacy, and emotion. Because for older riders, a bike isn't just transportation, it's who they are. And Japanese brands still don't get that. What's happening? For today's senior riders, motorcycles were never just machines. They were symbols of freedom, rebellion, and identity. The bikes they dreamed of in their 20s were not measured by torque curves or electronic ride modes. They were judged by rumble, chrome, and myth. And in the America of the 1960s and 70s, that myth belonged almost exclusively to Harley-Davidson. Owning one meant you had arrived. It meant you were part of something larger than yourself. Japanese motorcycles entered the scene in that same era, but their message was completely different. Honda's legendary slogan, "You meet the nicest people on a Honda," was a deliberate shift away from the outlaw image that surrounded Harley. These bikes were reliable, quiet, affordable, and approachable. For many, especially new riders and urban commuters, Japanese motorcycles made total sense. But for the rebellious core of American motorcycling culture, they felt sterile. They were practical, not passionate. They were tools, not dreams. That perception was cemented early. While Harley dominated rallies, clubs, and custom garages, Japanese brands built a reputation for affordability and technical refinement. And for an entire generation of riders who formed their identity on American roads, that difference never went away. Today, those same riders are in their 60s and 70s. They have more time to ride. They have the money. But when they think of motorcycles that represent their life story, they don't think of a Honda Shadow or a Yamaha V-Star. They think of steel tanks, long pipes, and a sound you can feel in your chest. This isn't about logic or engineering, it's about emotional memory. Even if a Honda Goldwing offers more comfort, more power, and better electronics than a Road Glide, it doesn't matter because it doesn't carry the same symbolic weight. For these riders, a Japanese badge still feels like a compromise. Not because it's inferior, but because it's not what they grew up wanting. But it's not just about brand nostalgia. It's about feel, the kind of mechanical experience that makes a bike more than just efficient transportation. And this is where the gap grows even wider. Overbuilt, underfelt. If you take the average senior rider and put them on a modern Japanese cruiser, there's a good chance they'll be impressed, but not moved. The engineering is undeniable. The Honda Goldwing is a technological marvel. The Yamaha Venture offers smooth power delivery and plush long-distance comfort. Suzuki and Kawasaki have their own versions filled with torque-rich engines and refined ride quality. On paper, these bikes should dominate the senior market, but they don't. Because what they offer in refinement, they lack in rawness. Older riders are not looking for the quietest engine or the smoothest throttle. They're looking for a connection, a sense that the bike is alive beneath them. They want a machine that shakes at idle, roars at speed, and reminds them with every vibration that this is not a car, this is a motorcycle. It should growl, not whisper. Japanese cruisers have steadily engineered those sensations out. In pursuit of reliability and refinement, they have eliminated much of the visceral feedback that senior riders cherish. The result? Machines that are flawless to ride, but forgettable to feel. Goldwings float, Road Kings rumble. The difference is not just mechanical, it's emotional. This is especially important to riders who came up wrenching their own bikes. For them, part of the joy is in the quirks. The slight shudder at startup, the way the engine bucks slightly under heavy throttle. The feedback that tells you you're part of the machine, not just riding on top of it. When Japanese bikes removed all that in the name of smoothness, they created a product that, while excellent, no longer spoke the same language. Younger riders might appreciate the ease, but senior riders often feel alienated. They don't want ride modes and touchscreen infotainment. They want a solid analog throttle, a physical clutch, and a direct connection to the road. In short, they want the motorcycle to feel like it has a soul. And when that soul is missing, the machine becomes hollow, no matter how well it performs. Still, even if the riding experience were identical, there's another factor that would keep many seniors away, and that's how the bike reflects who they are. We've dropped our must-have riding gear in the description. Take a peek before your next ride. Identity is louder than horsepower. A motorcycle is more than a vehicle. It's a projection of who you are, or at least who you want to be seen as. For senior riders, especially those who came of age when motorcycles were a countercultural statement, that projection is critical. They're not just buying a machine, they're buying an identity. Harley-Davidson understands this better than almost any brand on earth. Their bikes aren't sold on specs. They're sold on image. The look, the sound, the history, it all reinforces the message. You're part of something bigger. Indian Motorcycles has tapped into that same emotional core, offering heritage and strength wrapped in a legacy of American craftsmanship. Between them, they own the language of motorcycle identity in North America. Japanese brands have never fully cracked that code. Their marketing often leans on practical benefits, better fuel economy, smoother power bands, less maintenance. And while those are objectively valuable, they don't stir the soul. A senior rider doesn't care if the V-Star 1100 is more efficient than a Softail. They care that when they roll up to a bike night, heads turn. That when they park at a diner, someone says, "Nice ride." The issue is symbolic. Japanese bikes, regardless of quality, fail to deliver that identity reinforcement. They don't say, "I'm a rider." They say, "I'm a consumer." For senior riders, many of whom spent decades earning the time and money to finally enjoy this stage of life, that's a deal breaker. They're not looking for practicality. They're looking for presence. And presence isn't just about chrome or paint. It's about community, reputation, and cultural weight. It's about belonging. And when a bike doesn't feel like it represents you, it becomes hard to love, no matter how well it rides. This brings us to one of the most overlooked yet emotionally powerful parts of the buying process: the dealership experience itself. If this has hit close to home, if you've ever looked at a bike and thought, "That's not just a ride, that's me," then you're exactly who we made this for. Stick around, and while you're here, hit subscribe, because this story's just getting started. The dealership problem. Walking into a Harley dealership doesn't feel like walking into a store. It feels like walking into a clubhouse. The smell of leather, the rows of branded gear, the coffee counter, the showroom wrapped in posters of cross-country rides and local events. It's a lifestyle center. And for senior riders, especially those who've dreamed of owning a Harley for decades, it feels like a reward. By contrast, most Japanese dealerships feel like multi-brand utility warehouses. One corner sells scooters, another sells lawnmowers. Maybe there's a Yamaha Super Tenere parked next to a Kawasaki dirt bike. It's functional, yes, but the soul is missing. There's no sense of ritual or community. You're there to transact, not belong. That's a huge psychological gap. Older riders often want conversation. They want to talk to a sales rep who knows the model history from the 1980s. They want to swap stories with a service tech who's ridden to Sturgis twice. In a Harley dealership, that's baked into the environment. In a Japanese dealership, it's optional, if it exists at all. This lack of community presence is not just a problem at the dealership level. It continues after the sale. Harley and Indian both foster rider groups, nationwide events, and a strong sense of post-purchase relationship. With Honda, Suzuki, Yamaha, and Kawasaki, the experience ends the moment the paperwork is signed. For senior riders who value belonging as much as riding, that's a major letdown. In the end, it's not just about what bike you buy. It's about who you become when you ride it. And for thousands of senior riders, that transformation starts the moment they walk through the showroom doors and decides where they'll never walk back again. The value illusion. At first glance, it seems like a no-brainer. Japanese motorcycles are thousands of dollars cheaper than their American counterparts. A brand new Honda Shadow or Yamaha Bolt often undercuts a Harley by over $5,000 to $10,000, depending on the model. For riders living on a pension or fixed retirement income, that kind of price difference should be a deal sealer. But here's the twist. For many senior riders, the lower price isn't a selling point. It's a red flag. To understand why, you have to look past the price tag and into the mindset of the buyer. Senior riders didn't grow up chasing deals. They grew up chasing dreams. A motorcycle to them isn't a spreadsheet of savings. It's a reward, a symbol, a legacy. Cheap can sometimes mean accessible, but it can also mean disposable. When a bike is too affordable, it can feel like it lacks prestige. And for someone who's waited their whole life to buy the one, settling for a bargain doesn't feel like winning. It feels like giving up. There's also pride of ownership. Harley-Davidsons are more than machines. They're statements. You don't just park them, you pose them. A higher price reinforces the perception of value. Riders don't just ride a Harley, they wear it. Meanwhile, a less expensive Japanese cruiser can look and feel indistinct. Even if it runs flawlessly, the emotional payoff is flatter. There's no story behind the purchase, no aura of accomplishment. That's why the affordability of Japanese cruisers, while logical, is sometimes their downfall with older buyers. They don't carry the same weight. Because to many riders, a motorcycle isn't supposed to be easy to afford. It's supposed to be earned, which brings us to the problem of reinvention and why Japan keeps missing the mark. They age, but don't evolve. If there's one thing Harley-Davidson understands better than any Japanese manufacturer, it's the power of myth. Harley has evolved without ever truly changing. The look, the sound, the silhouette, they've refined their bikes, but never betrayed their DNA. That consistency is what builds loyalty. Japanese brands, on the other hand, often feel like they're still trying to figure out who they are. Look at the visual language of cruisers from Honda, Suzuki, or Yamaha. While their engineering has always been solid, their designs often chase trends instead of setting them. A Shadow or a Vulcan may technically be a cruiser, but it rarely evokes the same visceral reaction. Chrome accents over plastic fairings, faux air-cooled fins over liquid-cooled reality. To older riders, it feels like mimicry, not mastery. And when Japanese brands try to go retro, the results often land awkwardly. They either go too minimal, stripping away personality, or too ornate, adding unnecessary flourishes. There's no cohesive story. It's as if the designers tried to approximate what American bikes should look like without fully understanding the culture that shaped them. The result? A machine that looks fine, but doesn't stir anything inside. And for senior riders, that's a deal breaker. They're not looking for innovation's sake. They want timelessness. They want to look at their bike 10 years from now and feel the same pride they felt the day they bought it. Harley and Indian have mastered that feeling. Their bikes age like denim. Worn in, not worn out. Japanese cruisers age like old tech. Functional, but forgettable. This issue of aging gracefully leads directly to the next challenge. What it really costs to make a Japanese cruiser feel personal. They age but don't evolve. If there's one thing Harley-Davidson understands better than any Japanese manufacturer, it's the power of myth. Harley has evolved without ever truly changing. The look, the sound, the silhouette, they've refined their bikes but never betrayed their DNA. That consistency is what builds loyalty. Japanese brands, on the other hand, often feel like they're still trying to figure out who they are. Look at the visual language of cruisers from Honda, Suzuki, or Yamaha. While their engineering has always been solid, their designs often chase trends instead of setting them. A Shadow or a Vulcan may technically be a cruiser, but it rarely evokes the same visceral reaction. Chrome accents over plastic fairings. Faux air-cooled fins over liquid-cooled reality. To older riders, it feels like mimicry, not mastery. And when Japanese brands try to go retro, the results often land awkwardly. They either go too minimal, stripping away personality, or too ornate, adding unnecessary flourishes. There's no cohesive story. It's as if the designers tried to approximate what American bikes should look like without fully understanding the culture that shaped them. The result? A machine that looks fine, but doesn't stir anything inside. And for senior riders, that's a deal breaker. They're not looking for innovation's sake. They want timelessness. They want to look at their bike 10 years from now and feel the same pride they felt the day they bought it. Harley and Indian have mastered that feeling. Their bikes age like denim, worn in, not worn out. Japanese cruisers age like old tech. Functional, but forgettable. This issue of aging gracefully leads directly to the next challenge. What it really costs to make a Japanese cruiser feel personal. No tribe to belong to. For many senior riders, a motorcycle is more than a machine. It's a passport to a brotherhood. The weekend rides, the poker runs, the rally circuits, and the garage meetups. They're all part of the same social fabric. Harley-Davidson built that fabric over decades. Indian revived it. Japanese brands? They never stitched it together. You don't see Honda-only rallies drawing thousands. You don't hear about Yamaha Brotherhood weekends spanning 5 states. Vulcan owners exist, sure, but they rarely organize like Harley owners do. That absence of community is more than cosmetic. It's existential. For older riders, owning a bike is only half the experience. Belonging is the other half. Harley owners wave at each other on the road. They know what patches mean. They recognize tank shapes at a glance. There's a code, and codes create connection. Japanese cruiser riders, by contrast, often ride alone, not because they want to, but because no larger tribe exists to welcome them in. That isolation becomes a deal breaker. Riding isn't just about escape, it's about sharing. And the lack of cultural infrastructure around Japanese bikes makes that sharing harder. There are no decades-old clubs, no generational rituals, no well-known traditions. Riders don't just buy bikes, they buy stories, memories, and relationships. Without a shared mythos, a cruiser becomes just another vehicle. For senior riders who are often looking to reconnect with purpose or reclaim old routines, this kind of belonging is everything, and Japanese brands have never invested in it. Until they do, they'll keep building great bikes that ride well and sit in garages alone. But there's one final unspoken reason why Japanese bikes struggle with seniors. It's not about riding at all, it's about what happens after. Not made to be remembered. When a senior rider buys a Harley or an Indian, they're not just thinking about the road, they're thinking about legacy. They're imagining passing it down to their son or daughter. They're picturing it sitting in the garage long after they've stopped riding. They're building memory. Japanese cruisers, no matter how capable, don't evoke that kind of permanence. You rarely hear someone say, "This Shadow was my father's bike." You don't see families restoring old Vulcans together as heirlooms. These bikes are built to run flawlessly, and then they quietly disappear. There's no aura around them, no cultural gravity, no sense that they belong to a lineage. Older riders are deeply aware of time. They know each bike might be their last. So when they buy, they're choosing something that speaks to their life, something they hope will be remembered. A Harley isn't just a ride, it's a relic, a story on wheels. And that story continues even after the key is hung up. Japanese bikes, by contrast, feel temporary. They're not celebrated, they're not mourned. They enter and exit the market with little fanfare. Even when they perform perfectly, they rarely inspire reflection. For many senior riders, that absence of memory makes them feel disposable. And that's the final disconnect. Senior riders want bikes that live on, not just in the garage, but in stories, in photos, in family conversations. They want to be remembered, and they want their bike to be remembered with them. Until Japanese cruisers find a way to deliver that, no discount, no feature set, and no spec sheet will ever be enough. Why emotion still beats everything. There is a fundamental flaw in Japan's approach to the cruiser market. They think riders want machines. What they actually want, especially senior riders, is meaning. You can't engineer meaning into a motorcycle. You can perfect horsepower, smooth out the ride, and digitize the dash, but none of that matters if the bike doesn't make you feel something, and this is where Japanese manufacturers fall short every single time. Harley-Davidson built its empire on emotion, not refinement, not specs, emotion. From the moment that V-twin engine grumbles to life with its signature rumble, a Harley is no longer just a vehicle. It's a statement. It says freedom. It says rebellion. It says, "I'm still here." For older riders, that sound alone is a time machine. Indian motorcycles, same idea. Their stance, their styling, the low, aggressive lines, they evoke legacy. They feel like heritage cast in chrome. You don't buy an Indian because it's faster. You buy it because it feels like something your grandfather would have been proud to ride. Japanese cruisers, by contrast, are exercises in logic. The Honda Shadow, the Yamaha V-Star, the Suzuki Boulevard, they are beautifully engineered. They start with a button, they run flawlessly, they handle predictably, and that is precisely why they fail. There's no drama, no edge, no sense of ritual or experience. Riders don't bond with reliability, they bond with ritual, with quirks, with stories. When the bike never breaks, never surprises, never demands anything from you, it doesn't feel like a relationship, it feels like an appliance. This isn't a knock on quality, it's a recognition that motorcycling for older riders isn't about transportation, it's about identity. Japanese cruisers can dominate the spec sheet, but on the open road, the war is fought in the gut. Seniors aren't buying data, they're buying memory, and that's why emotion still beats everything. As we shift focus to Japan's future, the real question isn't whether they can compete on quality, it's whether they can learn to compete on meaning. Can Japan ever break the curse? To understand where Japanese cruisers fall short, you have to look past their engineering departments and into their marketing rooms. For decades, Japan has approached cruisers like a math problem. Identify what works, reverse engineer it, replicate it flawlessly. But here's the brutal truth. You can't copy heritage, you can only live it. And until Japanese manufacturers stop mimicking and start myth-making, they'll never earn the loyalty they crave. Harley didn't become a cultural powerhouse by building the best motorcycles. They became iconic because they told the best stories. Vietnam veterans came home and rode Harleys to reclaim their sense of self. Factory workers bought Harleys as a symbol of pride and ownership. Outlaws adopted them to defy conformity. The company became more than metal. It became memory. And Indian, in its rebirth under Polaris, tapped into the same well of nostalgia and narrative. They didn't just build bikes, they built meaning. Japanese cruisers have never developed that narrative spine. They release models with technical names. They market performance and affordability. They prioritize smoothness and silence. But they don't say anything. They don't invite the rider into a larger story. And that's the curse. No matter how refined the bike is, it will never inspire loyalty if it doesn't inspire identity. So can Japan break the curse? Maybe. But only if they stop viewing cruisers as just a market segment. They need to create symbols, not specs. The Honda Gold Wing was once the king of touring because it dared to be bold. It didn't imitate, it led. For Japanese cruisers to earn the hearts of senior riders, they must rediscover that courage. Build something distinct, build something strange. Build something that isn't just functional but unforgettable. The road to redemption isn't paved with chrome, it's paved with character. And until Japanese cruisers find theirs, the gap will remain. This is bigger than brands. At a glance, it looks like a brand war. Harley versus Honda, Indian versus Yamaha. But this goes deeper than marketing battles or product comparisons. What we're witnessing is a generational divide, a philosophical collision between two worldviews. On one side, the American motorcycle, loud, imperfect, bursting with symbolic weight. On the other, the Japanese cruiser, efficient, refined, devoid of emotional excess. And caught in the middle? The senior rider trying to decide not just what to ride, but who they still are. Motorcycles have always been more than machines. For the riders who came up in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, their bikes were declarations of freedom, of defiance, of independence. When those same riders walk into a showroom today, they're not just buying a new bike, they're reasserting that identity. Harley, with all its problems, still speaks to that longing. Indian has tapped into it. Triumph even offers a glimmer of it. But Japanese cruisers? They speak a different language, a modern one. And for many older riders, that's a dialect they don't want to learn. This disconnect has nothing to do with logic. In fact, the Japanese offerings often make more sense. They're cheaper, lighter, easier to maintain. Objectively, they're excellent motorcycles. But objectivity is the enemy here. Senior riders aren't trying to make the most rational choice. They're trying to reconnect with a piece of themselves. They're not riding to commute. They're riding to remember. That's why this is bigger than brands. It's about what each bike represents. The Japanese cruiser might be a better machine, but if it doesn't feel like an extension of the rider's identity, it won't win. Harley sells heritage. Indian sells symbolism. Until Honda, Yamaha, and Suzuki understand that, they won't just lose sales. They'll lose the war for meaning. And as the years go by, that war is only becoming more decisive. Why the gap keeps growing. Every year that passes, the difference between Japanese cruisers and their American counterparts becomes harder to close. Not because the bikes themselves are worse, but because the emotional distance is expanding. For senior riders, time has only deepened the mythology around Harley and Indian. The longer those brands survive, the more sacred their legacy becomes. They're not just selling motorcycles anymore, they're selling continuity. Meanwhile, Japanese brands have remained frozen in a state of technical evolution without emotional evolution. Their bikes are updated, retooled, redesigned, but never reimagined. The messaging doesn't change. The tone doesn't shift. The product gets better, but the story stays flat. And in a world where heritage grows more valuable with age, flat stories are fatal. You can see it in the rallies, in the riding groups, in the social media feeds. Harley riders post photos not of their bikes, but of their journeys, their friends, their history. Japanese cruiser owners rarely post at all. The emotional energy is missing, and that absence turns into silence. Silence in forums, silence in conversations, silence in identity. That silence is the real problem because emotion builds legacy and silence erases it. So the gap keeps growing. Not because Harley or Indian are perfect brands, not because Japanese bikes are inferior, but because one side understands what the motorcycle represents and the other still thinks it's just a machine. If Japanese cruisers want to matter to senior riders, they need to stop chasing perfection and start chasing meaning. Until then, the gap will remain. And every year it will widen, quietly, steadily, and permanently. If this video hit home, do 3 things. Drop a comment, hit the like button, and subscribe. We're not just talking bikes, we're talking identity, legacy, and everything that makes riding matter. So join the conversation and let your voice be heard.